All right, one of the more common things I see, or one of the more common questions I get is, hey, Dr. Baker, I have gone on a carnivore diet, and I've had a lot of good things happen to me. Maybe I've lost 50 pounds, maybe, I feel 20 years younger, my gut feels better, my autoimmune condition has resolved, my joints don't ache, my mood's better, on and on. But my cholesterol is high, and my doctor is concerned, and he wants to put me on a statin medication because my LDL cholesterol is some high number, and I'm really concerned about that. And am I going to have heart disease? And this is a question we often are faced with. And I think, in light of some recent data that has come out, particularly this lean mass hyperresponder baseline data, I think it's helpful to review my thoughts on that and what I think is something that may be helpful for you. First of all, I don't tell people to ignore LDL cholesterol. I know there's people out there that say LDL cholesterol has nothing to do with heart disease. It is not part of it's not part of the causal pathway. It's the firemen that are coming to put out the fire, and therefore we should ignore it completely. And that may be true. It may be perhaps true. I don't think the evidence that's out there at this point can, unquestionably confirm that. Now, my sort of opinion, and I will say this very loudly, it's an opinion based upon my observations and how I sort of see things going. Now, the lean mass hyperresponder baseline data has sort of further, I guess, convinced me of that. But I do think that LDL cholesterol becomes more of a dependent variable. What do I mean by that? Well, if your LDL cholesterol is high and you are like the average American, then you're probably more likely and more apt to develop cardiovascular disease. But what if you fall into this lean mass hyperresponder cohort, which the criticism is it's extremely rare. Oh, it's only like 1% of 1% of the population, 1 in 1,000 people or something like that, are people that have high LDL cholesterol and low triglycerides and high HDL and overall lean body mass. They're so rare that we could basically ignore that data. I think what we're going to find is that, one, it's not that rare, and two, I think the same physiology that many people on low carb diets do see their triglycerides coming down. Many people on low carb diets see their LDL rising, right? That's one of the big knocks around these sort of ketogenic or low carb carnivore diets. But if the physiology is basically the same thing, then I think the relative protection conferred by that, and again, this is the lean mass hyperresponder. I'm trying not to be too technical here, but they basically showed that people with really, really high LDL cholesterol had effectively no heart disease, or very little, very little to none, not what would be expected, even after, many, many years of being on this diet. The critics, again, are saying it's a rare group. It doesn't apply to very many people, and the time period was insufficient. Now that is, the principal author of that study would disagree with that because he's literally an expert on how to measure this stuff, and says, no, we should have been able to pick up significant cardiovascular disease, which wasn't shown. And so, there's some other interesting data points out there, and I think what we're going to see eventually, and why do I say eventually? Yes, there's going to be more data that I think is going to be more compelling. I think the lean mass hyperresponder follow-up data is going to be very compelling. I think it's going to further sort of reinforce this idea I'm talking about. But I mean, there's other data. For instance, there's a class of medication called the SGLT2 inhibitor. It's often given to diabetics to dramatically lower their blood glucose, right? It makes you pee out all the glucose. SGLT2 is a sodium glucose transporter, right? And so the glucose is dramatically peed out. But guess what? That drug has a reduction in cardiovascular outcomes, right? Or negative outcomes. So that alone, but guess what it also does? In many cases, it raises LDL cholesterol. So you've got a drug that lowers glucose, but can tend to raise LDL cholesterol, and cardiovascular events go down. So maybe it's more about taking care of the metabolic side of things, right? Some people say, well, the initiation of cardiovascular disease is some sort of vascular trauma, vascular damage, vascular inflammatory effect. So the endothelium, the lining of those vessels is somehow damaged. And then we start, subsequent to that, to see all the compensatory changes which leads to the atherosclerotic disease, maybe the sort of the inundation of cholesterol and the macrophage, foamy macrophages and whatnot. And without that inflammatory inciting event, there would be no significant cardiovascular disease, right? And that's sort of the bone of contention between these groups. Some people say just the LDL itself is enough to cause damage, and then it goes from there. And there's other people who are saying, wait a minute, maybe not in this situation. I think I'm in the latter category, and well, I know I am. So how do I approach it at this point? Well, I tell people if your LDL cholesterol is significantly elevated, first of all, look at the rest of your metabolic health. Because if that's bad too, then that's really a problem. But if it's isolated, elevated, and everything else is fine, you're lean, you're fit, your normal blood glucose, normal blood pressure, low inflammatory markers, low triglycerides, on and on and on, then I would say at that point, get some imaging, particularly if you're over, say, age 40. Get a CAC score or something along those lines, just to give you some level of idea where you stand metabolically, and are you someone that has that capacity to have disease. Now, a lot of people say, well, I got a CAC score, it was 0. Mine was 0. I did mine, I think 6 years ago now. It's been a while. I need to do another one just to see if there's been any progression, which I think I'll do later this year. But, a lot of people say, well, what if I got a score and it was not 0? It was 100 or 150. Well, in that situation, I think, it becomes very important to check it again, right? Get a serial exam to see which direction it's going in, and what you want to do with regard to, LDL levels and so on and so forth is a little bit more complicated, I would say, for sure. So anyway, that's what my thoughts are for now. I don't think we should ignore LDL cholesterol, but I do think the evidence is starting to show that it is going to be a dependent variable, and that there are going to be people where perhaps it's not a big deal, and I think that's, again, I can't say that 100% definitively, but I am sort of cautiously optimistic that we will be able to say that definitively within the next probably year or two, most likely. So anyway, you guys take care. Have a great day. We will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.